"Why are you wearing my father's watch?" The question didn't sound loud. It didn't need to. It sliced through the ballroom sharper than the violin music floating beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Blackstone Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to polished lips. Even the soft jazz drifting through the speakers suddenly felt distant, like the room itself had forgotten how to breathe. Ethan Whitmore stood at the center of it all in a midnight blue tuxedo worth more than most Americans made in a month, his silver cufflinks glinting beneath the gold light as hundreds of wealthy donors, investors, and politicians turned toward him at once. And across from him stood Naomi Brooks, a black waitress in a pressed black uniform, one hand still holding a serving tray, the other trembling just slightly at her side. Her eyes never left the vintage gold watch wrapped around Ethan's wrist. Because she knew that watch. She knew every scratch on the leather band, every tiny crack near the face. She had seen it across her kitchen table almost every day of her childhood. Her father wore that watch the night he disappeared 15 years ago. But 20 minutes earlier, Naomi Brooks had just been invisible. The gala was supposed to celebrate Whitmore Capital's newest charitable initiative, a $200 million scholarship foundation announced before a room filled with cameras and applause. The ballroom looked like something out of a movie. Walls lined with marble, towering floral arrangements imported from California, waiters weaving silently through tables covered in white linen and flickering candles. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago shimmered beneath cold November rain, while black SUVs lined the curb below, like silent bodyguards protecting the elite from the rest of the city. Naomi had been on her feet for almost 11 hours already. Double shift. Her lower back ached. The skin behind her heels burned with every step in her black work shoes. But she kept moving because rent was due in 4 days, and her younger brother's asthma medication wasn't going to pay for itself. People like Ethan Whitmore would never understand that kind of math. To them, money moved invisibly, quietly, like elevators opening before they even pressed a button. Naomi adjusted a tray of champagne flutes as she crossed the ballroom, keeping her posture straight the way her mother taught her years ago. "Never let them see you shrinking," she used to say. Some people mistake dignity for weakness. Most guests never looked directly at Naomi. They looked through her, past her, like she was part of the furniture, a moving shadow carrying expensive drinks beneath expensive lights. She was used to that, used to the quick smiles that vanished once rich people turned back toward each other, used to fingers snapping instead of voices speaking, used to hearing sweetheart more often than her actual name. But Ethan Whitmore noticed her. And that was the problem. It happened near the center stage just after the keynote speech ended. Naomi stepped carefully between crowded tables carrying a tray filled with crystal champagne glasses when a man suddenly backed into her shoulder. One glass tilted. Pale gold champagne splashed across Ethan Whitmore's sleeve. Only a few drops, barely enough to stain the fabric. But the billionaire looked down at his jacket like someone had thrown acid on him. The room tightened instantly. Ethan turned slowly toward Naomi, his jaw hardening as nearby investors awkwardly stepped aside. Then came the smile. The cold kind. The kind people wear when humiliation is about to become entertainment. "Unbelievable," Ethan muttered, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Naomi immediately reached for a napkin. "I'm so sorry, sir." But Ethan took a small step back before she could touch the sleeve. "People like you always ruin expensive things." A few nervous laughs scattered across the ballroom. Small, uncomfortable, cowardly. Naomi felt heat rise into her chest, but she stayed still. Because women like her learned early that reacting too fast could cost everything. Ethan glanced toward the crowd as if inviting them into the joke. Do they even train the staff anymore? More laughter this time. Someone near the stage lifted a phone slightly higher, recording. Naomi lowered her eyes. For exactly 1 second. Just one. Long enough to steady herself. Long enough to swallow the humiliation before it showed on her face. Then she looked back up at Ethan Whitmore. And that's when she saw the watch. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the silver tray as the ballroom noise slowly returned in uneven waves around her. Laughter faded first. Then whispers replaced it. Quiet little conversations wrapped in fake concern and expensive perfume. Ethan Whitmore adjusted his sleeve calmly, but his eyes stayed fixed on Naomi now. Not because she mattered to him yet, but because something about the way she stared at his watch made him uncomfortable. The billionaire was used to controlling rooms like this, controlling investors, journalists, senators, entire companies. But discomfort was different. Discomfort could not be negotiated away with a smile and a signed check. Naomi swallowed carefully and forced herself to breathe through the pressure building in her chest. Up close, the watch looked even more familiar. Gold face, brown leather strap, tiny scratch near the number 10. Her father got that scratch fixing the chain on her bicycle when she was 9 years old. She remembered because he laughed afterward and called it his battle scar. The memory hit her so suddenly she almost lost balance. For a second, she was no longer standing inside a ballroom filled with millionaires. She was back inside a tiny apartment on the south side of Chicago listening to old jazz records while her father sat at the kitchen table under warm yellow light, still wearing that watch after another late night, chasing stories nobody powerful wanted published. Marcus Brooks believed secrets were expensive. He used to say rich men spent more money hiding truth than building success. At the time, Naomi did not understand what he meant. She was 12 years old. She only knew her father asked too many dangerous questions and smiled too little near the end. Then one night, he never came home. No body, no arrest, no explanation, just silence. Silence so heavy it settled over their family like winter snow that never melted. Her mother stopped singing while cooking. Bills piled up. Reporters stopped calling after 2 weeks. The police investigation quietly disappeared after 3 months. And eventually the city moved on the way cities always do. But Naomi never forgot the watch. Ethan noticed her staring. His expression sharpened almost instantly. "Is there a problem?" he asked coolly. The room quieted again around them. Naomi opened her mouth, then stopped herself. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She knew how crazy this sounded. A billionaire standing in front of her, wearing the same watch her missing father owned 15 years ago. But deep down she also knew something worse. Ethan Whitmore recognized the look on her face. People nearby shifted awkwardly, sensing tension now instead of entertainment. A blonde woman in diamonds forced a laugh and touched Ethan's arm lightly. "Come on, Ethan." She spilled a drink, not state secrets. Several guests chuckled politely. Ethan smiled without looking away from Naomi. "Exactly," he said softly, "which means this little moment does not need to become dramatic." But Naomi barely heard him anymore. Her eyes stayed locked on the watch while fragments of memory flashed through her mind like lightning through dark clouds. Her father sitting beside stacks of documents at 2 in the morning. Newspaper clippings about missing charity funds. A photograph of Ethan Whitmore years younger, standing beside politicians outside a youth foundation launch. Her father's voice low and tired saying, "If anything ever happens to me, trust patterns, not people." Naomi's throat tightened. Because Whitmore Capital's charity division was the exact story Marcus Brooks had been investigating before he vanished. Back then Ethan was still climbing toward billionaire status. Young, ambitious, untouchable. Naomi remembered overhearing arguments through apartment walls late at night after her father received anonymous threats. Her mother begging him to let the story go. Her father refusing. Then the final night. Rain outside the windows. One rushed phone call. One sentence she never forgot. "I am finally meeting Whitmore tonight." Ethan suddenly stepped closer, lowering his voice enough that only Naomi could hear him. "You should. Get back to work." Calm words. But beneath them sat something colder. Warning. Naomi felt it instantly. The billionaire's smile remained polished for the cameras around them, but his eyes had changed completely now. Sharp. Calculating. Like a man rapidly searching through old memories he hoped stayed buried forever. And for the first time all evening, Ethan Whitmore no longer looked annoyed. He looked afraid. The rain outside the Blackstone Grand rolled down the towering glass windows in slow silver streaks, while tension spread across the ballroom like smoke nobody wanted to acknowledge. Naomi could feel eyes shifting toward her from every direction now. Wealthy donors pretending not to stare. Servers slowing their movements. Security near the exits subtly straightening their posture. The energy in the room had changed. Just minutes ago, she had been invisible. Now she had become a problem. Ethan Whitmore glanced briefly toward the photographers near the stage before forcing another smooth smile onto his face. Years in front of cameras had taught him how to hide panic beneath polished confidence. "You seem confused," he said quietly. adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. It is just a watch. Naomi almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, because powerful people always reduce dangerous things into small, harmless words. Just a misunderstanding. Just a coincidence. Just business. Her father used to warn her about men like Ethan. Men who could bury truth beneath language clean enough to survive television interviews. Naomi set the tray carefully onto a nearby table before speaking again. That watch belonged to my father, she said. No anger. No shaking voice. Somehow that made the sentence hit harder. Ethan's expression remained controlled, but a tiny flicker crossed his eyes. Recognition. Gone almost instantly. But Naomi saw it. So did a few people standing close enough to hear. The blonde woman beside Ethan lowered her champagne glass slowly. A hedge fund manager near the stage stopped mid-conversation. Silence began spreading table by table as curiosity moved faster than music. Ethan gave a soft chuckle meant for the audience around him, but the sound landed flat. I think you are mistaken. Naomi stepped closer now, lowering her own voice. The scratch near the 10 happened when I crashed my bicycle into a fire hydrant when I was 9 years old. Ethan's jaw tightened almost invisibly. My father repaired the strap himself because he could not afford a new one yet. The billionaire said nothing, and that silence was louder than anything else in the room. Naomi could suddenly hear tiny details around her with painful clarity. Ice clinking inside crystal glasses. The distant hum of elevators. Rain tapping softly against 40-foot windows high above downtown Chicago. She remembered another rainy night, too. 15 years earlier. Her father rushing out the apartment door while buttoning his coat. Her mother standing frozen near the kitchen sink. Marcus Brooks had kissed Naomi's forehead before leaving. Lock the door behind me, he told her gently. And no matter what happens, do not let fear teach you silence. Those were the last words she ever heard from him. Ethan shifted his posture slightly, careful not to appear rattled in front of the room watching him. But Naomi noticed the way his hand instinctively moved near the watch now, almost protective, almost defensive. You should be careful making accusations, he said softly, especially at an event like this. Naomi stared directly into his eyes. I did not accuse you of anything. That answer landed like a crack across polished marble, because both of them understood what remained unspoken. Nearby guests had stopped pretending not to listen. Phones hovered discreetly above table edges now. One young man, near the bar, openly started recording. Ethan noticed immediately. His public relations instincts were too sharp not to. The billionaire straightened his shoulders and smiled toward the crowd again. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced lightly, I think our hard-working server has had a very emotional evening. A few weak laughs followed, but not many this time. The room no longer trusted the performance completely. Naomi felt her heartbeat pounding harder now, but something deeper than fear had already taken over. 15 years of questions. 15 years. Of watching her mother work herself exhausted cleaning offices after reporters stopped calling. 15 years of hearing powerful men praise Ethan Whitmore on television while her family slowly drowned in silence. And now here he stood beneath chandeliers worth more than her childhood apartment, wearing the one piece of her father that never came home. Ethan lowered his voice again, colder now. Take the rest of the night off. Naomi did not move. What happened the night my father met you? For the first time since entering the ballroom, Ethan Whitmore completely stopped smiling. The silence after Naomi's question felt unnatural, almost heavy enough to touch. Around the ballroom, wealthy guests shifted uneasily beneath the warm amber lights, while servers stood frozen beside half-cleared tables. Nobody wanted to leave anymore. Not when something real had finally cracked through the polished performance of the evening. Ethan Whitmore stared at Naomi with the expression of a man calculating 20 different exits at once. But there was a problem with truth once it entered a room. It changed the oxygen. It made people curious. Dangerous. Naomi could see it happening already in the faces around them. The same investors who laughed minutes earlier were now watching Ethan instead of her. Watching the billionaire too carefully. Ethan slipped one hand casually into his pocket, but the movement felt rehearsed now, less natural than before. I think you are crossing a line, he said quietly. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Did my father cross one too? Another silence. Sharper this time. Somewhere near the stage, a glass slipped from somebody's nervous fingers and shattered softly against marble floors. The sound made several people jump. Ethan's jaw flexed. Marcus Brooks was a reporter, he replied carefully. He chased dangerous stories. I was not responsible for every risk he took. Naomi felt something cold move through her chest hearing her father's name spoken so smoothly from Ethan's mouth. Like he had practiced saying it years ago. Like he already prepared for this conversation long before tonight. So you remember him, she said softly. Ethan immediately realized his mistake. Tiny, almost invisible. But Naomi saw it happen. A brief flicker behind his eyes. One careless step from a man used to never missing them. The billionaire recovered quickly. Chicago was smaller back then, he answered. People in finance knew reporters covering corporate scandals. But the room was no longer accepting easy explanations. Naomi could feel it. Guests were whispering openly now. One woman near the back typed rapidly on her phone while glancing toward Ethan every few seconds. Another man quietly searched something online beneath the tablecloth glow of his phone screen. Because powerful names sounded different once attached to old disappearances. Naomi stepped closer, not aggressively, calmly. That calmness unsettled Ethan more than anger would have. The police told my mother there were no leads, Naomi said. No suspects. No evidence. Her voice remained steady, but memory pressed against every word now. But the week before he disappeared, our apartment got broken into. Ethan said nothing. Nothing was stolen, Naomi continued. Except his files. The billionaire's eyes narrowed slightly. Naomi noticed. Files connected to your charity division. Nearby conversations stopped completely now. Even the jazz musicians near the stage had gone quiet, uncertain whether to continue playing. Rain rolled harder against the giant windows overlooking downtown Chicago, turning the city lights blurry and distorted beyond the glass. Ethan finally exhaled slowly through his nose. You are making a very serious accusation in front of important people. Naomi looked around the ballroom briefly. Important people? She repeated softly. That is exactly what my father used to say scared him. Ethan's patience cracked for the first time. Not loudly, but enough. Enough, he snapped under his breath. The word cut clean through the room. Several guests visibly stiffened. Naomi held his stare. You know what I remember most? She asked quietly. Ethan did not answer. The morning after my father vanished, my mother kept calling his phone over and over while I sat on the apartment floor pretending not to cry. Naomi's throat tightened slightly, but she kept going. Then one man showed up outside our building in a black car. Ethan's face lost a shade of color. Small, but real. He told my mother to stop asking questions if she wanted to keep her children safe. Nobody in the ballroom moved now. Phones remained lifted everywhere. Tiny glowing screens capturing every second. Ethan looked toward the cameras and immediately understood the danger surrounding him had changed shape completely. This was no longer about humiliating a waitress. This was becoming a story, and stories were the one thing billionaires could never fully control. Naomi's eyes dropped once more to the gold watch wrapped around Ethan's wrist. So I will ask you one more time, she said softly. How did you get my father's watch? Ethan Whitmore opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. Because for the first time in many years, the billionaire realized every possible answer sounded guilty. The ballroom no longer sounded like a celebration. The soft clinking of glasses had faded into whispers sharp enough to cut through the music, still drifting awkwardly from the speakers near the stage. Ethan Whitmore stood beneath the crystal chandeliers with thousands of eyes fixed on him now. And for the first time all evening, the billionaire looked trapped inside his own event. Naomi could see it happening in real time. The carefully rehearsed confidence. The polished billionaire charm. The calm executive posture built through years of magazine covers and television interviews. Cracking. Slowly. Quietly. Like ice under too much weight. Ethan glanced toward the hotel security stationed near the ballroom entrance, then quickly looked away. Calling security now would only make him look worse. Wealthy people understood optics better than morality, and Ethan Whitmore had built an empire mastering both. But tonight, optics were slipping through his fingers one sentence at a time. Naomi remained still in front of him while rain hammered softly against the massive windows overlooking Michigan Avenue. Her pulse thundered in her chest, but strangely, fear had started disappearing. Because something bigger than fear had entered the room now. Truth. And truth changed power faster than money ever could. Ethan finally loosened his tie slightly before speaking again. Marcus Brooks came to see me 15 years ago, he admitted carefully. A ripple moved through the ballroom instantly. Tiny gasps, shifted shoulders, investors exchanging looks over champagne glasses. Naomi felt her stomach tighten. Hearing her father's name spoken publicly after all these years felt unreal. Like opening a locked room nobody dared enter anymore. Ethan continued slowly, choosing every word with surgical precision. Your father believed my company was involved in financial misconduct connected to one of our early nonprofit partnerships. Naomi stared at him. Was he wrong? Ethan ignored the question. He was obsessed, the billionaire replied instead. He pushed too hard into dangerous territory. Naomi felt anger flicker through her chest, hearing her father reduced to a problem instead of a person. Marcus Brooks had not been obsessed. He had been determined. There was a difference. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. Your father met with many powerful people during that investigation, not just me. Naomi noticed sweat beginning to form lightly near Ethan's temple despite the cold air conditioning inside the ballroom. The billionaire was losing control over details now. Over tone, over timing, and everyone could see it. A man near the back openly whispered, "This is insane," while another guest quietly typed Ethan's name into a search engine. Naomi took a slow breath. Then answer the question. Ethan's jaw tightened again. He gave me the watch. Naomi blinked once. Around them, the room seemed to lean closer. Ethan straightened slightly, as if relieved to finally have an explanation prepared. Marcus came to my office the night he disappeared. We argued. He accused people connected to my company of moving money through fake education charities. Ethan paused briefly before continuing. When he left, he forgot the watch in my office. Naomi searched his face carefully. Something about the story felt wrong. Too clean. Too polished. Her father never took that watch off. Not ever. Her mother used to joke that Marcus trusted that watch. More than banks or politicians. And you kept it for 15 years? Naomi asked softly. Ethan hesitated half a second too long. I intended to return it. Even the people around them seemed unconvinced now. Naomi noticed a woman from a local news station quietly approaching the crowd near the stage with her phone already recording. Ethan saw her too. Panic flickered beneath his expression before disappearing again behind corporate calm. You have to understand, Ethan said carefully. Your father made enemies everywhere. Naomi shook her head slowly. No, she replied. He made powerful people uncomfortable. That sentence landed heavily across the room. Ethan looked away briefly toward the rain outside the windows, and in that moment Naomi noticed something she never expected from a man like him. Exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion. Moral exhaustion. The kind people carry when they spend years outrunning old shadows. Then Naomi remembered something else suddenly. A detail buried deep in childhood memory. 2 weeks before her father vanished, he sat at their kitchen table with a cassette recorder and stacks of copied financial documents spread everywhere. Naomi had asked him why he looked scared. Marcus answered quietly, because when rich men start losing control, they stop acting predictable. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she looked back at Ethan Whitmore now, because he was no longer acting predictable either. And then, from somewhere near the ballroom entrance, a new voice suddenly cut through the silence. That is not the full story, Ethan. Every head in the room turned instantly toward the speaker. The voice came from the far end of the ballroom, near the marble staircase where the hotel staff usually entered carrying trays and catering supplies. But nobody was carrying anything now. Every head turned toward the older man standing beneath the dim gold lights with rainwater still clinging to the shoulders of his gray wool coat. He looked to be in his late 60s, tall but slightly stooped with tired eyes hidden behind thin glasses. Naomi did not recognize him at first. Ethan Whitmore did. And the reaction on the billionaire's face happened instantly. His posture stiffened. The color drained from his expression. Fear moved through him so visibly this time that even strangers across the ballroom noticed it. Walter, Ethan said quietly. Not angry. Not surprised. Cornered. The older man stepped forward slowly, removing his wet coat as the room parted around him. Wealthy guests instinctively moved aside the way people do when they sense someone carrying dangerous truth. Walter Pierce had once been Whitmore Capital's chief financial officer before disappearing from public business circles nearly a decade earlier. Naomi remembered hearing the name once when she was younger during one of her father's late-night phone calls. Back then she had not understood why Marcus Brooks suddenly lowered his voice every time Walter Pierce came up in conversation. Now she understood. Walter looked at Naomi first, not Ethan. There was sadness in his eyes, the kind carried by people who spent years regretting silence. "You have your father's eyes," he said softly. Naomi felt her chest tighten instantly. Ethan stepped forward sharply. "This is not the place for this conversation." Walter ignored him completely. "Your father was a good man," he continued. "Too good for the world he stepped into." Around the ballroom, phones remained lifted. Guests no longer whispered now. They listened openly. Some had completely forgotten about the gala itself. The giant screens behind the stage still displayed Whitmore Capital's charity slogan in glowing gold letters, while beneath them the billionaire's carefully built image slowly unraveled in real time. Naomi swallowed hard. "You knew my father?" Walter nodded slowly. "Marcus came to me after he discovered the Scholarship Foundation was being used to move money through shell nonprofits overseas." A sharp murmur spread through the crowd instantly. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, like a man watching disaster arrive exactly the way he always feared it would. Walter continued before Ethan could interrupt. "Your father believed Ethan did not know how deep it went at first." Naomi looked toward Ethan immediately. The billionaire said nothing. Rain crashed harder against the giant windows now, thunder rumbling faintly above downtown Chicago like the city itself was listening. Walter stepped closer into the center of the ballroom. Marcus was trying to protect evidence before publishing the story. Ethan finally snapped. "You do not know everything that happened." Walter turned toward him slowly. "No, Ethan. I know exactly what happened." The room went completely still. Naomi could hear her own breathing again. Slow, uneven. Walter reached inside his coat pocket carefully and pulled out a small faded envelope. "Marcus gave this to me 2 days before he disappeared." Ethan's face hardened instantly. "Walter." Just one word. But inside it lived warning. Regret. Panic. Walter ignored him and handed the envelope directly to Naomi. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it beneath the chandelier light. Inside sat a single photograph and a handwritten note. Naomi stared at the photo first. Her father standing beside Walter outside an office building 15 years earlier. Ethan Whitmore stood in the background near a black sedan speaking to 2 men Naomi did not recognize. On the back of the photograph, her father had written 4 words in black ink. "If something happens, expose everything." Naomi's throat tightened so suddenly she could barely breathe. Walter lowered his voice. "Marcus discovered millions of dollars being redirected from educational charities into private accounts connected to board members and political donors." Guests around the ballroom began openly reacting now. Shocked expressions, nervous glances. Several investors quietly stepped away from Ethan entirely. The billionaire noticed every movement, every inch of distance growing around him, because power had abandoned him faster than loyalty ever could. Ethan looked directly at Naomi then, and for the first time since this began, the billionaire stopped looking powerful altogether. He looked tired, haunted, human. "I tried to stop it," he said quietly. Naomi stared at him through the noise building around the ballroom. "Then why did my father disappear after meeting you?" Ethan Whitmore opened his mouth slowly. And this time, the answer waiting behind his eyes looked far more dangerous. Then silence. The ballroom felt colder now, though nobody had touched the thermostat. Fear had a way of changing temperature. Naomi stood motionless beneath the chandelier light, with the faded photograph still trembling lightly between her fingers, while Walter Pierce remained beside her, like a man finally exhausted from carrying years of silence alone. Across the room, Ethan Whitmore looked less like the untouchable billionaire from magazine covers, and more like someone standing at the edge of a cliff nobody else could see yet. Rain slammed harder against the giant windows overlooking Chicago, thunder rolling low through the night, while wealthy guests whispered openly around the ballroom. The gala was over. Everyone knew it. They just had not admitted it aloud yet. Ethan loosened his jaw slowly before speaking again. Marcus was not supposed to disappear. The sentence landed heavily across the room. Several people visibly stiffened. Naomi felt her heartbeat slam against her ribs. "What does that mean?" she asked quietly. Ethan rubbed one hand across his forehead, as though the room itself had suddenly become difficult to breathe inside. "Your father uncovered financial transfers connected to people far more powerful than me," he admitted. "Politicians, international donors, Men who treated charity foundations like private vaults. Walter lowered his eyes briefly. Shame moved across his face like an old wound reopening. Ethan continued carefully. Marcus came to me because he thought I could help expose them quietly before the story destroyed innocent employees connected to the company. Naomi stared at him. Did you help him? Ethan hesitated. And hesitation always reveals more truth than words. At first, yes. Murmurs spread again around the ballroom. One woman near the stage stepped away from Ethan entirely, clutching her purse tightly against her chest, as though proximity itself suddenly felt dangerous. Naomi's fingers tightened around the photograph. Then what changed? Ethan looked toward the rain outside the windows before answering. Fear. The honesty of the words stunned the room into silence again. Billionaires were not supposed to admit fear. Publicly, men like Ethan built careers pretending fear belonged to everyone else. But now his polished image was unraveling thread by thread beneath the ballroom lights. Marcus recorded meetings. Ethan continued quietly. Collected financial documents. Names. Offshore accounts. Walter nodded grimly beside Naomi. He planned to release everything to multiple newspapers at once. Naomi swallowed hard. Her father had always believed truth survived best when too many people carried pieces of it. Ethan looked directly at Naomi now. 3 days before the story was supposed to break, Marcus told me someone inside the foundation discovered what he was doing. Naomi felt cold move through her stomach. Who? Ethan's eyes darkened instantly. I never found out. Walter suddenly stepped forward. That is not entirely true. Ethan turned sharply toward him. Walter's voice remained calm, but regret sat behind every word now. You knew board member Charles Mercer was involved. The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. Naomi noticed immediately. So did everyone else in the ballroom. Charles Mercer was one of the most influential political donors in Illinois. A man whose face appeared beside senators, governors, and presidents for decades. Ethan shook his head once. You do not understand how dangerous he was. Walter's expression hardened. No, Ethan. You were just too afraid to stand against him. Naomi looked between them both as pieces slowly began fitting together inside her mind. Her father had not simply vanished after chasing corruption. He stepped into a war involving men rich enough to erase consequences. Ethan Whitmore closed his eyes briefly before speaking again. The night Marcus disappeared, he came to my office terrified. Naomi's throat tightened. Terrified of what? Ethan exhaled slowly. He said someone had followed him for days. The ballroom remained perfectly still now. Even the rain outside seemed quieter for a moment. Ethan's voice dropped lower. Marcus asked me to hold on to the watch temporarily because he believed he was being watched. Naomi felt her breath catch. That sounded like her father. Careful. Suspicious. Always planning ahead once. Danger closed in. He left my office alive. Ethan said firmly. I swear to you. Naomi searched his face for deception, but what she found instead looked worse. Guilt. The kind that survives years because it grows beside cowardice. Ethan's voice nearly broke as he continued. But I did not protect him after he walked out that door. Somewhere behind the crowd, a reporter quietly whispered, "Oh my God." Ethan looked around the ballroom filled with cameras, investors, and strangers witnessing his collapse in real time. Then his eyes returned to Naomi. And that failure has haunted me every single day since. Naomi felt the room shifting around her in ways that had nothing to do with movement. It was power changing shape. Just an hour earlier, every eye inside the Blackstone Grand Ballroom had followed Ethan Whitmore with admiration. Investors leaned toward him. Politicians laughed at his jokes. Cameras chased his smile like sunlight. Now those same eyes studied him differently. Carefully. Cautiously. Like people suddenly realizing the ground beneath them might not be stable after all. Ethan stood near the center of the ballroom beneath towering chandeliers that no longer made him look larger than life. If anything, the lights exposed him too clearly now. The lines beneath his eyes. The exhaustion in his posture. The weight of 15 years pressing against his shoulders all at once. Naomi still held the faded photograph against her chest, while Walter Pierce remained beside her in silence. Around them, wealthy guests whispered openly, phones glowing like tiny lanterns in the darkened tension of the room. Somewhere online, clips from the gala were already spreading beyond Chicago. Naomi knew it without needing to check. Truth traveled fast when rich people lost control in public. Ethan looked toward the ballroom entrance as two members of his executive board quietly arrived after hearing rumors spreading through the hotel. Their faces tightened instantly the moment they sensed the atmosphere inside. Nobody greeted Ethan anymore. Nobody smiled. One older investor even turned around completely and headed toward the elevators without a word. Naomi noticed every reaction, because this was the part powerful people feared most. Not prison, not scandal, isolation. The moment wealth stopped protecting them socially. Walter finally spoke again, his voice calm but heavy. Marcus wanted the public to know the charities were never designed to help children first. Several guests visibly winced hearing that. The giant screens behind the stage still displayed smiling scholarship students beside Whitmore Capital logos, and now the images felt almost cruel. The money moved through fake educational grants before ending up inside offshore accounts tied to political campaigns and private corporations. Walter continued. Your father found proof. Ethan lowered his head briefly. I tried to shut it down after Marcus disappeared. Naomi looked at him sharply. But you stayed rich. Ethan did not answer immediately because there was no clean answer available. Finally, he spoke quietly. Yes. The honesty hurt more than denial would have. Naomi remembered nights watching her mother count dollar bills at the kitchen table under weak apartment light after working double shifts cleaning office buildings downtown. She remembered overdue notices stacked beside grocery coupons. Her younger brother struggling to breathe during asthma attacks while insurance companies delayed medication coverage. Meanwhile, men connected to fake charities drank champagne beneath chandeliers and called themselves philanthropists. Naomi felt anger rise inside her chest again, but beneath it lived something else too. Grief. The kind that never fully disappears because it grows beside unanswered questions. A reporter near the front stepped closer carefully. Mr. Whitmore, she asked, voice trembling slightly. Did you ever report any of this to authorities? Ethan looked toward her slowly. Rain rolled behind him across the giant windows like silver scars across the night skyline. No, he admitted. The answer landed like broken glass across the ballroom. Several people gasped openly. One woman covered her mouth with both hands. Naomi stared at him in disbelief. Ethan looked directly at her now, and for the first time all evening his voice sounded stripped of performance completely. I told myself I was protecting innocent employees, protecting the company, protecting thousands of jobs. He swallowed hard before continuing. But the truth is I was protecting myself too. Nobody interrupted him. Because confession sounds different when it finally stops hiding behind public relations language. Ethan glanced down at the gold watch still wrapped around his wrist. Slowly, carefully, he removed it for the first time all night. The ballroom remained silent except for distant thunder rolling across Chicago. Ethan stepped toward Naomi and held the watch out in his open palm. I should have returned this years ago. Naomi stared at the watch without touching it. The leather strap looked older now beneath the chandelier light. Worn, tired, like time itself had been carrying guilt. Ethan's voice dropped lower. Your father trusted me that night. Naomi finally lifted her eyes toward him. And you failed him. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Yes. No excuses this time. No billionaire charm. Just truth standing naked in front of strangers. Somewhere behind the crowd, hotel staff stopped pretending to work entirely. Servers stood motionless watching a man worth billions lose something money could never buy back. And in that moment Naomi realized something her father understood years ago. Power did not collapse all at once. It collapsed sentence by sentence once fear stopped controlling the room. The ballroom no longer belonged to Ethan Whitmore. That was the strange thing about power. People spent years building it, protecting it, polishing it until it looked permanent. But sometimes all it took was one truth spoken out loud by the right person in the right room for the entire illusion to crack. Naomi stood beneath the chandelier glow holding her father's watch in both hands now, while silence spread through the Blackstone Grand like floodwater. No music played anymore. No glasses clinked. Even the hotel staff had stopped moving. Around the ballroom, phones remained lifted, capturing every second as one of Chicago's most celebrated billionaires stood exposed not by rage, not by scandal alone, but by the quiet weight of his own guilt. Ethan Whitmore looked smaller somehow. Not physically, spiritually, like the room had finally stripped away the armor money built around him for years. His tie hung loose now. His shoulders sagged beneath the expensive fabric of his tuxedo, while rain rolled endlessly across the giant windows behind him. Naomi stared down at the watch again, gently brushing her thumb across the cracked leather strap her father repaired himself all those years ago. Suddenly, she could hear his laugh again in her memory. Warm, tired, honest. Marcus Brooks never cared about becoming famous. He only cared about people telling the truth when truth became inconvenient. That was the part powerful men hated most about him. Naomi slowly lifted her eyes toward Ethan. My mother waited for him every night for almost a year, she said softly. Ethan lowered his gaze immediately. She used to leave the porch light on even when the electric bill was overdue. Several guests quietly looked away. Shame had started spreading through the room now too. Not just Ethan's shame. Collective shame. Because many of them suddenly realized they had spent years applauding men they never truly questioned. Naomi continued calmly. My little brother kept asking why Dad stopped calling. Her voice nearly cracked there, but she steadied herself. I did not know how to answer him. Ethan swallowed hard. The billionaire who once controlled billion-dollar negotiations now looked unable to survive a single sentence from a waitress holding an old watch. Walter Pierce stood nearby with his hands folded tightly in front of him, staring at the marble floor as though carrying ghosts no amount of money could silence anymore. One reporter quietly wiped tears from beneath her eyes while still recording. Outside, thunder rolled again above Chicago, low and distant. Naomi looked around the ballroom one final time. Wealthy donors, politicians, investors, men and women dressed in black tie elegance beneath golden light. People who spent entire careers believing status could separate them from accountability. But tonight accountability had walked into the room wearing a server uniform and tired shoes after an 11-hour shift. Ethan finally spoke again, his voice rough and unsteady now. I cannot change what happened to your father. Naomi nodded slowly. No, she replied. But you could have told the truth before tonight. That sentence landed harder than anger ever would have. Because deep down Ethan knew she was right. The billionaire looked around the ballroom filled with cameras and strangers witnessing the collapse of the carefully manufactured image he spent decades building. Then he looked back at Naomi with exhausted honesty. I was afraid. Naomi studied him quietly for several seconds. Then she answered with the one thing nobody powerful ever expects from people they humiliate. Grace. Fear explains silence, she said softly. It does not excuse it. The room fell completely still again. Because truth sounds different when spoken without cruelty. Ethan closed his eyes briefly as though the words physically hurt to hear. And maybe they did. Naomi carefully slipped her father's watch into her apron pocket before stepping away from the center of the ballroom. Nobody stopped her. Nobody spoke. Guests simply moved aside silently as she walked toward the exit beneath the soft gold lights. The same people who barely looked at her hours earlier now watched her like she carried something priceless. And she did. Not revenge. Not money. Not victory. Dignity. Outside the hotel, cold November rain drifted softly across the Chicago streets while black cars lined the curb under glowing city lights. Naomi stepped onto the sidewalk and looked up at the skyline her father once believed could still become honest if enough people stopped being afraid. Behind her, inside a ballroom built to celebrate wealth and power, a billionaire finally learned the one thing money could never buy back once it was lost. The chance to do the right thing before it became too late.